Michael, in India, infrastructure is at core of human liberties, improving quality of life, fulfilling economic aspirations. Over the last decade, we have been on an accelerated pathway for infrastructure capacity creation, driven by the goal of becoming a developed economy, Viksit Bharat, by 2047. While we have seen our share of accelerated capacity creation, whether it is highways, creating 35 kilometers of highways every day or 14, 15 kilometers of rail track. The issues like aging infrastructure or increasing complexity in capacity, large capital projects has come to the forefront. So, in your experience, how global economies have actually responded to some of these challenges?
Yeah, look, infrastructure is a huge spend. It's a huge spend. Globally, you'll find that there's infrastructure plans in every country that are significant billions, and you're coming to, conservatively, it's about 5 trillion a year for the next 20 years. Massive number, right? So, but that has a number of drivers. One is because infrastructure is foundational, both for society and for economies. So everybody's realizing that you have to do that, but then the complexity comes into that because you've got aging infrastructure that needs to be renewed, but also made more resilient, adapted from either climate or other resilience issues like cyber, like security. So the world is a different place now with various conflicts. And so all of those things are being thought through in terms of how do you deliver on infrastructure in your given country. And India is doing, super job in terms of the scale that needs to be invested, but also the speed that you're building roads and rail at the speed you are. That is unprecedented versus the rest of the world, which is phenomenal. It's just the scale you have to do that. But every other country is trying to catch up on that, and that brings complexity. Some of the things you got to consider is this is not just an engineering problem. This is everything else. It is all of the things around that, not only that resilience piece, but how do you grow your economy? How do you make it socially integrated? How do you bring equality into and inclusion into the delivery of infrastructure? That's the hard bit.
Yeah.
And then there's simple things like, I don't have enough money to do this, so I need to pull the public and private sector together to deliver all this. These are all the challenges that are coming from what is a very, very big number globally, but how do you deliver against all of those? One of the things that stands out globally is that move from isolated assets, so considering an asset on its own, to that more integrated system, that there is a connectivity between various assets within a city but also connecting the infrastructure, the technology, and the people. When you look at India, how is this systems approach being applied across energy, transport, logistics, and even rail and road that you talked about? That backbone of mobility and regional integration.
So, Michael, India's pathway to a developed economy is deeply ingrained into delivering the right capacity, the right quality, and most importantly, on time. And fortunately, we had an early realization on need for integrated planning. So if you look at the initiatives like PM Gati Shakti, Gati stands for speed and Shakti stands for strength. The National Gati Shakti Master Plan, it specifically aims to integrate all of these modes. So the overall objective is about bringing in integration and complementarity between energy, infrastructure, or various modes of infrastructure. We have seen the network planning groups being formed across various sectors whose job is to ensure that infrastructure assets complement each other. There is desired level of intermodal integration, and they don't compete for the same traffic or the same requirement. Having said that, I think there is still a long way to go. We are still planning our infrastructure based on modes of transport.
Yeah.
We create a national rail plan or a national road plan, whereas there is a clear realization in the government to move towards an integrated corridor-based approach, wherein all of these assets do not compete for the same traffic, but they actually all together complement each other to meet a specific outcome which is defined. I think there are right steps in that direction. So Government of India is already planning to increase the mandate of these network planning groups into a full-fledged, a much larger institutional structure, and we expect to hear on it very soon. Again, as I said, a lot has been done, but a lot needs to be done more. So, Michael, once these systems start coming together, early planning becomes critical. Globally, what do successful infrastructure programs show about the importance of early planning, whether it is corridors or whether it is large infrastructure networks in shaping the long-term competitiveness?
So I think those that are most successful are those that understand what the outcome, that is outcome based. What's the impact you're trying to achieve? What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? And so therefore it's all focused on operations. So can you get to the point that this is not an engineering problem? This is an operations. How does the end user get to use this? So does the business case stack up, because it's got to be affordable, it's got to work that way? And how do you put that together? But more importantly is how do you make it efficient from a resource point of view, from a cost point of view, from an emissions point of view? Is it resilient? Is it inclusive? And all of those objectives. If you embed those that are most successful, take that right to the very start. So when you're putting the strategy together, how are you knowing that's outcome that you want to achieve? How do you deliver against that? And so what we've seen is look, and then of course you're trying to manage the way through the project in managing cost, managing time to get there within budget and in the timeline that's desired. So this tends to be a very analog process. And what we're seeing those again most successful is bringing digital into that process a lot better from the very start. So not only do you have an extending beyond just the pure economic view. This is not just an assessment of, is it value for money? How much does it cost? It's about how do I deliver against all of those objectives. So bringing in things like digital twin from the very start, layering that in and understanding is how this will operate, and you can test it in that digital environment before you have to put any brick in the ground. But also, where are you going to source your raw materials? Who are you going to provide that to? How does that supply chain work? How are you going to operate it that it's operating efficiently? And if you go from an economic point of view, it costs you about 3 times. You spend about 3 times as much in operations as you do in the capital cost. Yet everybody focuses on that capital cost, and so
rather than the life cycle.
Rather than the life cycle cost. And so if you can look at this on a life cycle basis, if you can look at how you're operating, then you become far more effective in delivery. But you can only start doing that from the very start. If you've done that, if you're trying to retrofit at the end of construction, you've got that wrong. And so that constant view on operations is how you become most successful when you're starting that from strategy, and that use of technology to help manage your way through that and help even to keep the focus on that space. It helps to drive this through. So we would say this is not, engineering and construction hasn't got all that much more complicated over the years. It's just everything else that the expectation is, the expectation of the user, how you can deliver this, what the expectation from a sustainability point of view. But there's a process to help that, and as soon as if you can start that very early, then that's the projects that are the most successful. It's still progress, anywhere, all parts of the world, because this tends to jump to being an engineering question. How do I build this? And the reality is, if you throw enough money and enough time at things, you can build virtually anything. Doesn't mean it's a successful project. Doesn't mean that it's achieving all the objectives. And again, so if we can focus on that operations phase, you will get to that successful project, and probably far more cost efficient. So Anurag, you talked about multimodal corridors and industrial networks. You might just talk a bit about how early investments in these is improving efficiency and supporting growth on the ground.
So, thanks, Michael. So if we look at our own infrastructure journey, early investment in some of the flagship programs like Bharatmala, the Sagarmala programs, the National Industrial Corridor program, they have yielded concrete efficiency gains on ground. A case in point, if we look at the Sagarmala program, which is the port-led development program of India, while the port capacity has doubled, the vessel turnaround time has come down or reduced by 50%.
Really?
Similarly, if you look at Bharatmala, some of the best expressways being built, but with a clear impact on travel time. Delhi Mumbai or Amritsar Jamnagar expressways, they have reduced the travel time to half. Logistics cost, we were at 14% of GDP sometime back, and now we believe we are already seeing the early offshoots to being in single digits, as we have seen from recent Government of India numbers. So I think these network and these early investments have actually enabled an efficient industrial logistics ecosystem, an integrated industrial logistics ecosystem, which with the sole objective of enabling India's or propelling India's growth for a manufacturing giant of the world, as well as to improve global competitiveness. Michael, as these corridors and large-scale infrastructure networks come to scale, and what we've seen, especially in context of India, that the impact extends beyond just infrastructure performance. If you look at for every single dollar or rupee invested in infrastructure, there's a ripple effect, a catalytic effect with outcomes in the range of 2.5x to 3x. How are global countries evaluating infrastructure as drivers of employment, resilience, and rather inclusive growth?
So, as I said earlier, I mean, infrastructure is a foundation to the economy, a foundation to society and social society. And so, one, it's vital that it's there. One, it's vital that it's upgraded and updated in order to support that growth that you're looking for. So as you're looking to increase employment or to attract people into a particular area, it's really important that the infrastructure is of a level that's going to make that attraction. And the bit is, it's important, back we talked about planning, it's really important that you're starting planning and the reason why you're building this from the very start. So, you know, we've talked before, it's not about building stuff. The infrastructure is not about building the box, I call it the box. It's about, how do you fill the box? How do you get people to come and use that infrastructure that's there? How do you get them to come and live in that area? How do you get them to use that infrastructure and make it, as efficient? And it's built to be used. That's because it's foundational. And so it's driving that. So the assessment is how much, you're increasing, economic growth and, numbers of employed. There's lots of statistics that can be collected on that basis. But what you'll find is if you haven't invested in infrastructure, and lots of countries are finding this, that's where they haven't done it or it's aging. One, it's attracting less people because there are other better places to go around the world. People are far more mobile, globally and willing to move there because of the underpinning and underlying infrastructure. So now you're competing against those. So now you can assess, have I getting growth in employment? Is it because, I've invested in a particular area? There's a lot of cases where you've got to consider what could I attract to a particular area. So, and then there's various either real estate or infrastructure that needs to be put in place in order to support that new industry or that new sector, or the growth that's there and the shift in a particular sector, whether it's becoming more technology based or from a manufacturing point of view, it might just need different real estate in order to support that. So all of those things need to be considered, and that's why it comes back to that planning point. You've got to understand what outcome you're trying to achieve from the infrastructure you're about to build, rather than it being the engineering question and can you build it? Of course you can build it. It's why you're building it, and that's where the jobs and the social outcomes and all of that is far more important as an assessment, rather than the actual how much have I built, how much have I spent.
Michael, as India scales faster, aligning ambition with execution certainty becomes really important. We have had our share of success.
Yeah.
But what more can we learn from global best practices and improving execution certainty for infrastructure projects?
Certainty in terms of time and cost, and getting there at the time. We talked about the outcome. That is the outcome, but you've got to do the journeys too. So what we are seeing is greater use of the data that's in place. One of the challenges of infrastructure is there is enormous amounts of data, but it's not generally gathered appropriately. It's not always shared.
Or looked at.
And then the last bit is, even if you have it all, it's not really looked at. And certainly not pulled together in a form that can be understood and used. One of the things we're doing is we're looking at, from a cost point of view, is can you stack your data from the very start? You're getting the appropriate data from suppliers, from the whole ecosystem, so it feeds in. So now you can track, you're starting connecting procurement with finance, with the technical drawings. So am I ordering and am I managing my supply chain aligned with design? So avoiding fraud, waste and abuse, but also making sure that I'm ordering it from the right supplier. What sort of supply chain is that? Is it circular in terms of from a sustainability point of view? Can I make decisions that relate to the levels of emissions, in order to get it to me, or the type of materials being used? So again, greater use of data in that very early stage. Now that also underpins time, and you can manage that. So now, because you're managing that data, is that you have a better chance of understanding at an earlier stage whether you have an issue in time. So this has happened. This is the impact, and we're layering in predictive and AI into these tools that we're using now with clients, where you can make that, the information is coming to the C-suite very early on, and almost as live as we can, but make it, it's not the weeks based that used to be there from a paper-based system. So now that is being flagged to the C-suite, so that they understand that this is happening, there's an issue, it needs to be dealt with. And so decisions can be a lot quicker, which means you can as you move that along the process, you have greater opportunity to come in on time and on budget, and that brings you the greater certainty. The more you can get that confidence level, then it's easier to raise capital from other parties. It's easier to bring citizens along in terms of what needs to be done from an infrastructure point of view. Everybody gets far more confident in the entire process, and then again, it allows that outcome-based approach to be a lot easier. So it is about data, it is about technology, but it is also back to when we talked about early start, early planning, focused on that outcome.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. It was a pleasure to see you at Arohana, and it was an insightful conversation. And I really hope and wish to see you more in India in the near future. Have a nice day.
Thank you.